Hello, crafty friends, and welcome to my channel, Create with Kalia. I'm Kalia. Today I'm going to be working on scrapbooking these pictures. I have two 4x6, two 4x4, and four 3x4 pictures. Before I get started creating the rest of my layout, I'm super excited to show you several ways to create your own wood grain papers to use as the background for your layouts or cards. The first thing you're going to do is to remove your cutting blade from your paper trimmer and put in the scoring blade. I'm using white willow cardstock and I'm going to space out every 1 to 1.5 inches. You can do this however you want to make whatever look that you want in terms of your wood grain. You can have the score marks evenly spaced, or you can make them a variety of spacings. I'm going to run the score blade up and down my paper so that it's scored twice, and then I'm going to move the paper over and continue scoring. You can see that I've created some very nicely defined scored lines on the white willow cardstock. The next thing I'm going to do is to bring in my early espresso ink pad. I'm going to hold it at approximately a 30 to 45 degree angle and just pull it down my paper to create my wood grain. I'm using my glass mat to help me move the ink pad down because it's not going to stick to the glass mat. You do have to be careful that you don't pause just like I did there, otherwise you may get more ink in one spot than you intend to. Some of our ink pads are quite sticky, so if you have a very juicy stamp pad, this may not work as well as it does with a drier ink pad. I pass over the full piece of cardstock twice to help make sure that I have enough color on the paper. Keep in mind that the ink will dry back a little bit, and so some of the streaking that you can currently see won't be quite as obvious once the paper dries more. I'm also going to be covering pieces of this up and using parts of it for cards, so don't be discouraged if it doesn't quite look like the wood grain you imagine yet. Another way to add color is to just stamp directly onto your glass mat and then pick up the color that way. The ink does dry very quickly sitting on the glass mat, so it may be hard to pick up some of the color, and you may need to add some additional water or additional ink to make sure that the color picks up the way that you'd like. I like that this technique gives you a different look to your wood grain. For this piece of cardstock, I used the same as the first technique and had an ink pad that was getting quite stuck and sticky. So I ended up with much more color on it than I was intending. However, I can still use it as a card base. Here's where I am doing the swiping technique again, and you can see my ink pad get stuck. Another technique that you can use is to use one of our Stampin' Spots. The linen ink pads tend to move a little bit more smoothly across our cardstock. You can see that there are more streaks to the wood grain because the ink pad is so small, but this will also make an excellent card base. The final technique I'm going to show you is to do some ink blending. You can blend right onto your scored cardstock. This technique also leaves quite a bit of ink on your cardstock between your score marks, but you can use the brush to concentrate your color on the score marks and bring out the ridges. Please make sure to stay tuned to the end of this video, and I'm going to show you a series of cards that I made from these different techniques that I have shown you on how to create your own wood grain. As a reminder, we used the swiping technique to create these. We used the swiping technique and our ink pad got stuck to create these three. Then we used the technique of swiping through ink that we put onto the glass mat. And finally, these two were created using the linen Stampin' Spots. Now that we've created our background paper, we're ready to start working on the layout. My initial thought was that I was going to include some white cardstock behind the wood grain paper, and when I do that, I realize I don't really like the way that that looks. I really like the look of the wood grain as the base of this layout. I'm also looking and I see that the red gas can that's in these pictures is a nice pop of color. I bring in some Poppy Parade cardstock, which is the perfect match to the gas can and helps bring in a pop of color that makes my pictures really stand out. I also really like this Night of Navy cardstock because it helps bring in a lot of the blue that's in my pictures. However, I'd rather have a pattern paper behind my pictures. I find this misty moonlight colored paper in the Country Woods collection, which is still available on my website. Misty Moonlight also goes very well with my pictures, and I love the paint chip pattern paper with the wood grain that I'm planning on using as my base. I do realize that I want a little bit more pattern paper in my layout and someplace for the picture on the far left to rest. I bring in a different wood grain from the Country Woods collection in Early Espresso. I like that this goes with what I already have started, but is also a little bit different looking pattern. And I think that that will look really nice as some kind of a banner or extra piece alongside my layout. I've cut down the paint chip pattern paper to the sizes I plan on using for my layout. The first piece I have cut to 9.5 by 10 3/4, and the other piece I have cut to 6 3/4 by 10 3/4. The smaller paper will be on the left-hand page. I'm going to put these down and I will line them up exactly in the middle of the cardstock base. I'm going to gut out the wood grain cardstock that's behind the blue paint chip paper so that I can save that part of the cardstock for another use. When I remove the cardstock that is behind another piece of paper, I try to leave myself at least a ½ inch border. That means that I'll cut the hole in the wood grain paper a ½ inch smaller on all sides than what I measured my blue paper to be. That gives me a place to put my adhesive and make sure that I'll be able to attach the pattern paper to my cardstock well. I've finished cutting and this is what it looks like. I'll be able to use the piece of wood grain for other projects. So now I'm ready to put my pattern paper back onto my base page and get it adhered down. Again, you can see how I've left myself plenty of room to be able to put my adhesive and then attach my pattern paper so that it won't move and I can build up a secure base page. Once I have the pattern paper adhered down, I'm ready to start cutting my photo mats. I did cut this picture down a little bit, so it's slightly less than 3 by 4. And I cut my mats so that they are 3 by 4, 4 1/4 by 4 1/4, 4 1/4 by 9.5, and 6 1/8 by 8 1/4. I don't want my mats to be too large behind my photos, and I also wanted to save myself having to mat every photo by doing two larger pieces of cardstock. I'm starting to look at this as the layout for my photos, and you can see that I've brought in those banners that I had talked about earlier. I'm really liking the way this looks, and so now I'm ready to start bringing in some stamps. I love this A Day With You stamp set. It is currently on Last Chance on my website, and it's got several Father's Day themed stamps. I also am bringing in the Trusty Tools stamp and die set. The die set has this great pegboard and a whole bunch of tools, so I'll be using several of these for this layout. First, I'm going to stamp the pencil. One of the things I really like about the Trusty Tools stamp set is that it gives you both the outline and the interior to some of the tools that are featured in the stamp set. This pencil is one example. I stamped the outline in black and then I was able to fill in the pencil color with another stamp. There's also a hammer and a wrench where you stamp the image outline and then you can fill in the color with a solid color stamp. I'm going to stamp and die cut several more images from this set and then I'll be right back. I've die cut out this pegboard, the hammer, the wrench, the pencil, the toolbox, another wrench, and several nuts and bolts and screws from this set. This is a perfect set, and with Father's Day coming up, I wanted to use it in this particular layout of my husband and my son working on fixing our garden tiller. I've also brought in the More Memories stamp set, Saying Something Special ephemera pack, and A Day With You stamp set. One thing I think that all scrapbookers struggle with is what to do about our tiny scraps. I save most of mine, and I'm going to show you why that is. I love using my tiniest scraps for some of these really small die cuts. It means that I don't have to cut into a brand new sheet of cardstock when I already have scraps that are available in my scrap pack. I do store my scraps and my full-size sheets of cardstock together in the same packet so that when I reach for a package of my cardstock or even my pattern paper, I know exactly what I have for scraps and can use up first if it's small enough. Out of these two small scraps, I was able to cut a ton of these nuts, bolts, and screws that I'll be able to use as embellishments around my page. From the Trusty Tools stamp set, I found a stamp that says, "You're the most awesome." I'm stamping that on the front of the toolbox image, and then I'm going to place that to the left-hand side of my page. I'm not sure if that's where I want it to live quite yet, and I'm going to start bringing in some of the other images that I die cut to see if I can start building up some embellishment clusters that I like. From the ephemera pack, I'm going to take out this piece that says, "I'm so proud of you." I think that that will work well as one of the sentiments for one of my embellishment clusters. I really like the embellishment cluster I've built up on the left-hand side of the page. However, it doesn't feel like it fits there very well to me. I also don't want to have two pieces of the pegboard on the same side of the layout. So you will see that I move that around. I decided to bring in the More Messages stamp set and stamp that because I love some of the sentiments that are on this. You'll notice that this is one large stamp, so you will need your largest stamping block in order to be able to stamp with this. I think that the stamp is so cool because it's designed so that the die that goes along with it can be placed over the stamped images, and then you will cut out all of the sentiments at one time. You'll see shortly that I put the die cut over what I have stamped, and I can't get it to fit quite right. I finally realized that the reason for that is because I have the cutting part up rather than facing down towards my cardstock. When I orient the die correctly, I'm able to fit it onto the stamped sentiments. I'm so excited that I'll be able to stamp out a whole bunch of sentiments and get them die cut all at once. Here's what that looks like once it's gone through the die cutter. You have tons of options, and some of these will be great for the layout that I'm working on building. I love these pictures of my husband and my son. My son was just under 2 years old, and my husband has always been great about getting him involved in the projects that my husband is working on. One of the things he really enjoys showing my son is how to work with tools and how to fix different things around the house. And it's so cool to see, even at 2 years old, that my son was hanging on to the tools and trying to use them just like dad did. I just used a stamp from the A Day With You stamp set that says, "Doesn't matter what we do as long as I'm with you." And I'm going to use the same die from More Messages to cut out around that particular sentiment so that I can use it for one of my embellishment clusters. As you can see, I have moved the pegboards so that they're spaced differently on my layout. This spacing feels much better to me, and I feel like the toolbox works much better on the left-hand side of the page. I've also made the pegboard at the top of the page smaller. Another wonderful thing about this particular die cut is that it does not cut out around the edge, meaning that you can make the piece of pegboard as large or as small as you want. I, of course, had to cut down a little bit of the pegboard off of what I had originally cut to make it smaller and fit better with that embellishment cluster. One of the sentiments from the More Messages die says, "You can do anything." And I used that one next to the toolbox. I'm now using this crosshatch stamp from A Day With You to add some additional visual interest to my embellishment clusters. I've also moved the right hand embellishment cluster down to the bottom of the page and like that placement the best of all of the places I've tried. I cut out the pegboard in lemon lime twist, and the handle of the toolbox is in granny apple green. I bring in my alphabet a la mode dies and cut out Mr. Fix-It for my title in early espresso cardstock. I'm really loving the way that my layout looks, and I'm going to add a few more of the crosshatch stamps around Mr. Fix-It. Now that I have built up my pages, I also love the way that the wood grain turned out. The last thing that I'm going to do to complete my layout is to print out my journaling in Print Then Cut in Cricut Design Space. I'm using the Avery label paper to print out my journaling, and I'm going to attach it directly onto my page so that you can see some of the wood grain pattern through the label paper. Keep in mind that this label paper is extremely sticky, and as soon as you touch it to your paper, it will stick. I burnish that in so that it's not very visible. Use the crosshatch stamp a couple of more times to frame out the journaling, and then I'm going to consider this layout done. Remember to stay tuned to the end so that you can see the cards that I made using the wood grain techniques that I showed earlier. And here's my completed layout. I'm so happy with how the wood grain turned out and love the trusty tools dies that helped me add some additional accents to this particular layout. The nuts, bolts, and screws are the perfect extra embellishment when normally I would have used gems. And now, as promised, here are the cards that I also created using the wood grain paper. I obviously used the trusty tools, stamps, and dies again to create these first two cards. All of the sentiments on these cards were leftovers from when I stamped more messages for my layout. This card uses a different pattern from the Country Woods paper and a new stamp set called Sunrise Sailing. This card and the next card use the same swiping technique and were the card bases where the stamp got sticky and stuck. This card also uses the new Gallery Blooms stamp. This is the card where I use the Stampin' Spot, and the last card uses the ink blending technique. If you've enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and a full list of the products I used will be located in the description. Thanks for watching and craft on!